President Trump's tariffs are some of the most sweeping in U.S. history, and they are now facing serious legal challenges. We're taking an in-depth look at their constitutionality and whether they can survive legally. And in less than a month, new leadership takes over at the Jacksonville City Council. Incoming Vice President Nick Howard discusses the city's challenges in the year ahead. Plus, shaping the future of downtown. Lori Boyer joins us as she winds down her 6-year run as CEO of the Downtown Investment Authority. All that on This Week in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Rick Mullaney, the Shercliffe Executive Director of the Jacksonville University Public Policy Institute, filling in for Kent Justice today. He'll be back next week. We have a jam-packed show for you this morning, and thank you for being with us. A centerpiece of President Trump's second term has been tariffs. On April 2nd, a day he referred to as Liberation Day, he imposed 10% tariffs on 185 countries around the globe, sector tariffs on various industries, and broad-ranging reciprocal tariffs. The sweeping 10% and reciprocal tariffs have been challenged legally. Here to discuss the legality of the tariffs is Jacksonville University law professor Nathan Richardson. Professor Richardson grew up here in Jacksonville. He attended Georgetown University for undergraduate degree and then law school at the University of Chicago. He has published extensively nationally and teaches constitutional law and administrative law in the Jacksonville University College of Law. Professor Richardson, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Rick. It's great to be here.
We are really pleased to have you on this very important and timely topic. And I'm going to start off with something very basic, which is the U.S. Constitution. Mm-hmm. Under the United States Constitution, who has the authority to impose tariffs?
Rick, a tariff, as you know, is a tax. There's a lot of things that are vague in the Constitution. One thing that's clear is that the power to tax, the power of the purse, lies with Congress, with the legislative branch. Now, as you know, like any power the legislative branch has, sometimes it delegates it to an agency or to the president, him or herself, as it's often done in the context of tariffs. But that core power lies with Congress. The Constitution is clear on that point.
So with tariffs, Article 1, legislative power, impose tariffs. But as you said, they can delegate it. And I think one of the arguments here is they delegate it through statutes. Mm-hmm. How would that delegation work with tariffs? Do they have the ability to delegate the implementation and the execution to the executive branch and to give them tariff authority?
The short answer is yes, but both as a matter of historical practice. Since the founding of the Republic, the Congress has delegated some ability to set tariffs to the executive. Now, Congress is typically pretty stingy about setting tax rates. That's something it typically does itself. But one exception to the exception, if you will, is that setting tariffs, going into the details about which countries are subject to which rates, how things work at the customs office on the border, is something that is not entirely, but consistently been delegated, at least in part, to the executive. And that makes sense. You probably don't want, for all the good things they do, the folks in Congress to decide individual tax rates. The executive can respond faster. The executive can respond to an emergency. The executive can make tariffs part of other negotiations with other countries. So there's some logic to it.
So let's talk about what happened here. If President Trump has the authority to impose these tariffs, he's going to have to look to a statute that gives him that authority. And for these liberation tariffs that I mentioned, these sweeping tariffs, he pointed to a 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act. How about describing that act, his argument for this authority?
So what that statute does, history of it's interesting. It's among the broadest tariff powers that Congress has given to the president. But it's actually a reduction on previously granted tariff powers that were used by Richard Nixon in ways that Congress didn't like. So IEEPA was passed in a way that revised that previous statute, and it was at least intended, one could argue about how successful it was, but was at least intended to constrain the president's power in that regard. In general, it's a fairly compact statute, but in general, what it allows the president to do is when the president has declared an emergency, then to regulate international trade. And the president and past presidents as well have interpreted that to give them at least some power under regulation to impose a tax. In other words, to impose a tariff when an emergency exists.
Then let's talk about the lawsuit here. A lawsuit was filed saying this was illegal. They looked to the 1977 statute, and this went to the International Court of Trade.
That's right.
How about briefly discussing that court and what that court decided with regard to the legality of these tariffs?
Sure. The Court of International Trade is a special court. It actually dates back to the 1890s, modern form, 1980s. But essentially what it does, it has jurisdiction over all civil claims, civil lawsuits about international trade and tariffs laws in the United States. Essentially, what happened in this case is that importers, who are the people that have to pay a tariff, sued to challenge the legality of Trump's Liberation Day tariffs. They had standing to do so because they're out there paying the tax. And they said, essentially, that the president has exceeded his authority under the statute. The court here agreed with them. In fact, did so in fairly quick fashion and fairly comprehensive fashion by ruling at an early stage called summary judgment. Essentially, just based on the pleadings, we think that those challenging the tax win. Why? Why did the court say the president went beyond his legal authority? Essentially because, according to the court, the way the president interpreted the statute would let him apply a tariff under any circumstance. President pointed to an emergency here. What's the specific emergency? It varies for different tariffs, but for the Liberation Day tariffs, he essentially said, we have a substantial trade deficit with most countries around the world. That has been true for decades. It has been true for the entire life of IEEPA. The United States last had a net trade balance, positive trade balance in the early 1970s. So if this is an emergency, it's been an emergency the entire time the statute has been. And so therefore the court concluded, if this counts as an emergency, the president is not constrained by the statute. He or she could impose any tariff they want. That can't be, the court said, what Congress intended when they passed the statute. And even if it were, even if Congress did write that, the court further said that's probably a constitutional problem because there are some limits in the law on how much power Congress can delegate.
So let me ask you, does that mean, and another court came to the same conclusion, does that mean that these tariffs, the 10% tariffs and the reciprocal tariffs, are now illegal and unlawful?
For a brief period, the answer was yes. Then, of course, the Trump administration appealed. The appeals court, I believe it's the First Circuit sitting in New York, fairly quickly issued a stay of the lower court ruling, which has the effect of putting the tariffs back in place. That was widely reported as like, oh, well, the lower court has been overruled. No, that's a normal procedural move during an appeal, and I wouldn't say it predicts very much at all about the way that the appeal is eventually going to come out. In my view, the Court of International Trade's opinion is fairly well reasoned. I'm not going to say for sure that it will prevail on appeal, but I don't think it's an easy move for the appeals court to reject it the way it might appear they're doing if they just put an administrative stay in place.
So let me ask you this. If the appeals court confirms, does that mean that President Trump no longer has tariff authority?
No. First of all, because he's almost certain to appeal to the Supreme Court. I would be shocked if this issue were not finally decided by the Supreme Court. Of course, the follow-up that people ask me when I tell them that is when? Don't know, but next year would be my prediction. So, okay, fine. Then the Supreme Court decides one way or the other. Then do we have a final answer on tariffs? Unfortunately, no. The president has other statutes. Even if the president were to lose this case, there are other statutes. The president has made a maximalist interpretation of this statute, as he's done in other areas, that's gotten him into some legal trouble. There's a reason he did that, because it gives him a lot of power. But there are other fallback statutes that might require him to report to Congress, have limits on who and how long you can impose tariffs, things like that.
And very briefly, in his first term, he imposed tariffs on China. Did he use other statutes there? And also with the sector tariffs, such as aluminum, steel, and autos, did he use other statutes?
Yes, he's used a variety of other statutes. What's different about this one is, at least as he's interpreted, the courts rejected, the sheer breadth and power that it gives him. There's going to be continued uncertainty here until and unless Congress fixes this by giving us a clear answer on the president's powers.
Thank you so much for that very informative description of what has happened and where we are. We hope to have you back again real soon.
Thanks so much, Rick.
After the break, the Jacksonville City Council has new leadership July 1st. The incoming Council Vice President Nick Hallen joins us. That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville.
Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us. City Council Vice President Nick Hallen is a graduate of Duke. By the way, I understand they had a pretty good basketball team this year, but they might have had the Florida Gators sneak in and win a national championship. He also has an MBA from the University of Chicago. He's a veteran, businessman, and will become Council Vice President on July 1st. Councilman Hallen, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you for having me, Rick.
Councilman, there's a lot of talk in the city about this budget year might be a little bit different than past years, a little bit challenging. So at your incoming leadership, what would you identify as some of the biggest challenges facing the city in the year ahead?
Sure. Well, let me talk about both priorities and challenges. My priorities on council are similar to what they were when I ran for council, and they will be the same when I'm on council leadership. And it's simple, Rick. It's public safety, jobs, and fiscal responsibility. And I was elected to deliver common sense solutions in all those areas. So if we think about public safety, I'm the city council liaison to JSO, and I've gotten to know the sheriff and his team really well. For the last 3 years, we have focused on giving JSO the tools, the resources, the funding they need to deliver safer streets and neighborhoods. And what we're seeing is 120 more officers on the street, crime down, murder rate 50% down, crime rate down about 25%. So I think we're seeing some remarkable results, and based on common sense, give the police more tools, get better results. And then if you look at jobs, one of the areas that I've always been focused on, and you hear it, me say it pretty frequently, is I don't believe in incentivizing businesses to come here with cash grants. I do believe in giving them tax rebate grants. So one of the things that I did when I first got on council was work with the city to change the public incentive plan. And we made it easier. My background's aerospace and defense manufacturing. We made it easier to bring those kind of companies here, and it's created over 700 jobs. And you'll hear a big one on Tuesday night at City Council. We'll be approving Project Bluebird, which is auto aviation coming from California, bringing 1,200 jobs at Cecil Field. And I think there's a lot of potential out at Cecil. And then finally, where you allude to big challenges, this is where I think have our biggest challenges over the next 3 years, and that's fiscal responsibility. So we have budget deficits over the next 3 years, upwards of $300 million. The council auditors have pointed that out clearly to all 19 of us. And at the same time, people are struggling out there. So I think what we have in the city government is a spending problem. We can't increase millage rates. I'll be against that. We need to leave more money in the hands of Jacksonville residents so they can afford the higher inflation. They can afford housing. So we will look at cutting spending across all of government over the next 3 years.
Well, let's talk about the budget and some of the things you just outlined. In this budget coming up, I expect it to be over $2 billion.
Yep.
Over half of that, over $1 billion, goes to public safety, police and fire.
Yep.
And you just mentioned the big initiatives, but also the spending piece.
Sure.
What about the impact of public safety, particularly as it comes to some new pensions, and what that may mean for the budget in the near term and the years ahead?
Yeah, when I mentioned $300 million in deficits moving forward, that's even before some of the collective bargaining agreements and the unknown contributions that the city will have to make for unfunded liability for new police and fire on FRS. So that just means public safety is always the number one priority of this city and of this city council. So that just means we have to focus on making sure we spend within our means elsewhere in the budget. And I actually worked with the auditors on a study that looked at how the city budget has grown from 2017 to 2024. And really the city departments haven't grown too much higher than the rate of inflation plus the rate of population growth in Jacksonville. But what has grown further are a lot of external funds. So a lot of contributions to nonprofits, a lot of those cash incentives to downtown and citywide development and businesses moving here that I mentioned. We need to move towards tax rebates instead of cash incentives. So some of those things will be looked at real closely over the next several years.
Let's talk about that revenue and the expense side. On the revenue side, we've seen an explosion in property tax revenue, which makes up over 50% of the budget.
Yeah.
There have been projections that may not be quite as robust as the past.
Yep.
On the spending side, we've had our local version of DOGE.
Yes.
And is that going to provide some help on the spending side? Because it does appear that this year's budget, and as you mentioned, future budgets are going to be a bit challenging here in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I think the DOGE efforts will help, and the Finance Committee has been taking a look at spending across all departments and all sub-funds for the last year very closely. We will be doing that over the next several months going into the next budget review. But for sure, those DOGE efforts will help. I mean, the way that we are thinking about it on City Council, the way that Council President-elect Kevin Carrico and I both think about it, is we fund the vital core functions of government first. And that's public safety, that's infrastructure, that's vital city services. If we have money left over, then we can do some of those things like incentive programs or some of the nonprofits that are needed desperately in the city. But we need to be wise with taxpayers' money because residents out there right now with inflation, with the high cost of housing, are hurting.
Well, we certainly talked about the budget constraints and the problems ahead. But let me ask you one last question before we go, and that is sort of a bigger picture. What do you think are some of the greatest opportunities for the city in the year ahead and beyond?
Oh, just right in front of us, one wonderful opportunity is putting a UF graduate campus here. I'm really excited about that. You'll hear us debate that throughout the month of June. Hopefully a final vote on June 24th. And what that is the University of Florida has decided to put its kind of workforce graduate programs, including professional MBA, artificial intelligence, data analytics, computer science, those programs here on a new campus in La Villa. That's going to be wonderful for the city of Jacksonville. And when I talk about jobs, that's not only going to support workforce, but bring a healthy workforce for all sorts of businesses across Jacksonville.
One last piece, very, very briefly. There's lots of talk about moving the jail off the river. Is that on the drawing board? Is that important to the future development of that corridor?
I think as we see development going on in the sports complex, as we see UF, as we see everything in between and the South Bank across, I think for sure that jail is going to have to be relocated. And the sheriff has been clear that he wants it to be a transparent process, he wants it to be a competitive process, and he wants public involved in helping make the decision.
We covered a lot of ground, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for
Hope to
having
have
me.
you again in the future. Lori Boyer's service as CEO of the DEA is coming to an end, and she joins us to discuss the future of downtown. That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
Welcome back. Joining us is lawyer, businesswoman, former city council president, and CEO of the Downtown Investment Authority, Lori Boyer. Lori, I want to thank you for your service to the city of Jacksonville. I want to thank you for your time as council president and for the last 6 years as the CEO of the Downtown Investment Authority, and thank you for being with us here today.
Thanks so much, Rick. Really appreciate it.
Lori, this gives us a unique opportunity to ask you a question about something over the last 6 years, which is almost half of the time of the DIA, which was established in 2012. Over the last 6 years, what would you identify as what has been most significant and potentially a shift or a transformation of where downtown is heading?
So I really kind of see three aspects to that. Andre Wallace, my predecessor, had the first half of DIA and created a great foundation, and it was very much a residential first focus when I came in. We had basically no residential downtown population when we started, and the effort was try to get to that magic 10,000 number. We're closing in on that now. I would say that 10,000 is a benchmark, but it's not the be-all, end-all. And what we're going to see is that we're going to be surpassing that even in the next 2 to 3 years. So when that Pearl Street district that was mentioned comes online, you're going to see closer to 15,000 residents downtown.
Lori, kind of hard to overstate how important that is, isn't it?
It is.
Can you talk about that for just a second?
Well, so what happens is, you're trying to create enough momentum that retail will follow the rooftops, that you will see the food and beverage establishments come back. You start to have the activated street. You have people want to work downtown because they can live downtown and they enjoy the environment of that urban, vibrant center. So you had to get that kind of base, that foundation, which I think we're very close to reaching that point. Second thing that I would emphasize is the fact that when I came on board, almost all of the riverfront was considered development land and had been, whether it was the old landing site that was being re-envisioned as all developed. Shipyards had previously been sold all for development. And what you see now, after our board went through a number of studies and processes, is about half of that or 2/3 of that is now riverfront parks. And I think those destination parks are critical to creating that downtown vibrancy and lifestyle that is going to make it attractive for new residents to move downtown and attractive for businesses to relocate downtown from a suburban location or from some other city. So those are important to us.
Let me ask you on that change in destination parks. That represents, I think, a shift in both vision and direction for decades to come. And is that the vision and direction that you embrace for the future of downtown?
I think it's critical. It also creates that tourism draw. One of the challenges that we've had for the Jaguars and for other events downtown is people would come just for the event and then leave. And so part of what we've been striving to do is to create a downtown where you want to stay for 2 or 3 days. There are things to do. And we're not going to compete with Disney. It didn't make sense to try to build an amusement park of equivalent value. We have a great beach. We're not competing with the beach. But we do have a beautiful river downtown and the opportunity to both provide access to it and then provide interesting things to do on it. whether it is entertainment establishments, passive recreation, active recreation. They'll be really interesting and unique parks, and they're available 365 days a year. So you don't have to wait just till there's a particular event.
So Lori, what's the third thing that you thought over the last 6 years that is so significant?
So the third thing that I think is really important is going back to Councilmember Howland's discussion of fiscal responsibility. That was a concern of mine while I was on City Council, a concern of mine when I got to DIA. And DIA had been upside down, if you will, and its financial obligations were more than its revenue. So it was borrowing money from the city. So we were able to reverse that. We're now in a position where DIA has maybe $10 million a year on the North Bank that is available to do capital projects. The ability to do those infrastructure projects both helps diminish the need for incentives and takes a burden off the general fund. So the general fund can focus on other things because we can pay for those infrastructure projects.
Lori, all three significant, all three exciting, but let me shift to something that may be even more exciting. We're a little short on time, but over the next 6 years, what do you think is most significant and what can the people of Jacksonville expect in downtown?
I don't want to pick one winner, but I do think that the University of Florida campus coming, the completion of the Four Seasons and the new stadium complex, both on both sides of downtown, and then completion of all these parks as they're coming online, completion of Pearl Square, which is a 1,200 unit project altogether, will have just a major, major impact on downtown activation. And I think the collection of those is going to take us over that tipping point.
Let's talk about that tipping point briefly. We have less than a minute, but a lot of people in Jacksonville have felt that, we just haven't quite gotten there downtown. They look at other cities around the country and they're lively and they're vibrant. Lori Boyer, you look into your crystal ball. Do you think a lively and vibrant downtown is in Jacksonville's future?
I definitely think it's in the future. I think it's in the next decade, and it may even be in the next 5 years.
Well, we're going to hold you to that.
Okay.
Lori, I want to thank you so much for your public service and for everything you've done for the city of Jacksonville and the DIA.
Thanks so much, Rick.
That's today's final word. Thank you all for joining us. Kent Justice returns next week. Be sure to tune in then for This Week in Jacksonville. I'm Rick Mullaney, Surecliff Executive Director of the Jacksonville University Public Policy Institute. Have a great week.
See why every day more people are choosing News 4 Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.